I'd like to welcome Pierre Mitchell from Spend Matters.
Good morning, everybody. It's morning in Vegas. Usually it's kind of a quiet time as you guys are licking your wounds from the night before, but I'm sure you were all very good corporate citizens, very responsible. Didn't tie one on, but do what I did. I had like 3 cups of coffee, so I'm like ready to go, and I'll try to at least keep you awake with the energy. The slides will be available, like all the presentations, so you don't have to worry about like scribbling stuff down. Not like you'd be doing that anyway. So anyway, let's get rolling. I don't have too much time, so we're going to do a little bit of a flyby. Just a quick note about myself and my organization. Our organization is Spend Matters, spendmatters.com. We're an industry analyst. We focus on technology, and we help companies in operations and procurement, supply chain, legal, contingent workforce, make good decisions about how to use the hundreds of vendors and technologies out there to kind of get good business outcomes. And just a little, I think it's great. Colin had a great story about himself. There's actually a story, because I'm a bit of a dinosaur as well. If you go back to the early 90s, I was working for Coopers & Lybrand, which is now PwC, and we were doing a lot of kind of IT architecture work and whatever. And it was interesting because they had these things called case tools, computer-aided software engineering, and it was all about model-based development. So you could actually go business process models and then data models, and you could do all this stuff almost where an end user, not but like a power user, could go and develop systems and really have custom systems driven based on the business process and the information that you wanted to support. And it was cool, but it was all like high-end custom development mainframe stuff. At the same time, there was these things called MRP systems, which are now ERP systems, running on relational databases, crazy, client server, and they were great solutions, packaged solutions, but you couldn't really customize them much. Yeah, you could tune some reports, but it's still kind of true to this day. There's not a ton that you can do with a lot of the big ERP vendors. You can bolt on a field here and there. You can tune some language, but still pretty much, it's the Model T Ford, right, of applications. So, at the time I was like, God, wouldn't it be cool if there was a vendor that could actually develop, using these kind of platforms, these development platforms, actually develop something, packaged applications with its own tool set, and not only turn over the apps to you, but actually give you kind of the keys to the kingdom where you could extend the data models, you could extend the processes, extend the forms, extend the dictionaries, right? And really create a platform that could do this. And then I was like, nah, it's never going to happen. So, cut to 15, 20 years later, you start getting like Salesforce doing a little bit on the sell side, but still not really a lot going on in terms of where you can have the ultimate impact within the business, and that is ultimately around contracts expanding out into commerce management. We'll talk about that in a second. So, I'm not going to do too much of the shock and awe chart. There's a lot of complexity out there. There's a lot of risk. You all have your own kind of outside-in issues that you have with regulatory issues, little things like trade wars and Brexit and, all sorts of things, right? So, and by the way, you're not getting a lot more budget, if at all, especially, with the pending recession potentially. So how do you do more with less, right? And so part of that, and actually this is, there was a Deloitte CPO study that we actually helped them with this year. And you can kind of go through all the issues that the CPOs, had that's out there. But 2 are kind of interesting. So one was complexity and risk with the mega suppliers. So as you start dealing with the Googles and the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Salesforces and all these guys, and now you got to deal with their complex deal structures and deal with their paper, and how do we manage that? That is an issue. How do we kind of adopt that, but still be able to kind of control our own destiny, right, in terms of doing digital business strategy stuff, et cetera. The other one that's kind of interesting is managing digital fragmentation. So digital is great, in terms of being both a solution, but it also creates a problem as you start standing up lots of cloud-based solutions all over the place. Suddenly it's like, all right, how many supplier masters do you have? How many sources of contract information that you have all over the place? It starts getting a little ugly. So, but services is really where it's at. So in this kind of everything as a service economy, and what does that mean? And I'm going to use The Graduate. So if you guys don't know what The Graduate is, the movie is, check it out for all the millennials out there. It's a good movie. Lots of services that you might consume or that you might produce. You're a prosumer of these services, right? So as the world goes to this service-based economy, and it's actually interesting because Agiloft does, IT service management and, business service management, right? So think about that trend of digital outsourcing, third-party management, those things coming together, right? You got to be able to manage services. And services are complicated. It's not like you think, oh, supply chains are complicated. Services are kind of squishy. They're multivariate. They really take a lot of shape. So whether you're on the buy side, kind of doing source to pay, or whether you're on the sell side, ultimately there's a flow of services and you're spending money on those services. There is an exchange of value, right? There is commerce. And the ultimate foundational, single most important system of record, it's not the general ledger, sorry, finance. I mean, that's great for closing the books, but ultimately it's about the contract. That is the system where you should be specifying how do you and your partners work together to make commitments to each other and also make sure you're getting bang for the buck and that you're also protecting the value that you guys are creating together and hopefully growing some value as well. So I thought I'd pick something as simple as a car, right? And even cars are moving to a service, right? So you can kind of you can buy a car and do all these services yourself, or you can lease a car. And by the way, if you're going to do leasing, pay attention to IFRS 16 and lease accounting. And by the way, what are lease agreements? They're contracts, very complicated contracts. So even if you go all the way to, the model of Uber or taxi, where you're buying, a car as a service, you're buying an outcome, transportation, there's a lot of services, that are part of this, right? And so you need to be good at buying and selling services. And the way to buy and sell services, the core competency around that is going to be managing your contracts in kind of a much more robust way. So for those of you who are in IT, you understand what this is. This is a cloud architecture stack. For the rest of you, don't worry about it too much. Basically, you got some infrastructure. If you rotate it, counterclockwise, it's almost like, bottom to top. You got some infrastructure, servers, network, telecom. Then you kind of get into your platform, and what we mean by platform, it means that's like the most ubiquitous word in the world, but it basically means that upon which you build, and certainly around operating systems and things like that. You're familiar with iOS and Android, but think about Alexa, 100,000 skills that are being built using the Alexa platform that you can kind of build some capabilities. You can actually build some bots, and really, ignoring the chatbots piece of it, a bot is really just a set of capabilities that you can kind of serve up through kind of a digital interface to do something that maybe you don't want to have to do over and over and over. That's where it's most powerful. So you can kind of think of that idea of the counterparty contract comes in and you say, oh, great, this is a Microsoft contract. I know using AI, I know what to look for. I know what the metadata is. I can kind of see all the clauses. I can see what changed. I can see how that relates back to my clauses that I like to use on my paper. Make some comparisons and just radically, and by the way, I know that through some intelligence, sources or that I can kind of negotiate on a couple of these things. So sometimes about far out, right? But that ability to model these contracts more deeply to get better value out of your counterparties is key. So platforms is a big thing, and you guys are actually on the cutting edge. You might not realize it, but you guys are actually on the cutting edge, and I think in terms of using low-code platforms, which are very popular kind of in the mid-market and to the enterprise level, around how do we kind of build apps using this kind of tool set. So workflow and BPM and forms. You guys are all doing it in the trenches, right? And projects and all that kind of stuff. How do we do that to really create our own apps that are going to create more value for us in our functions, in our end-to-end processes, so we add more value to an end-to-end process, and then ultimately out to our customers and how we interact with our suppliers. So if you're managing suppliers, all this digital stuff is having a massive impact on them. So if I saw Citigroup, they were like doing a presentation, they're like, yeah, we basically cut our outsourcing spend in half because of RPA in basically like 2 years, because they knew that the service providers, and you're seeing a lot of this in legal, alternative legal service providers, LPO, or whatever you want to call it. I think we have an expert here from E&Y, she'll talk more about that area. They are radically transforming themselves so they can deliver their services much better, than others. So make use of that. Take all that innovation and all that digital strategy stuff that your suppliers are doing, bring that internally, capture that, and use it you can reduce cost, but also reduce risk and get more value out of it. So the foundation, the one thing I want to kind of leave you with in this talk as we think about contract lifecycle management and commerce lifecycle management, and I know the term, it's like, all right, another acronym, I got a 4-letter acronym now. Well, it's an important notion, and the idea is Now, how do we not just manage the life cycle of the agreement, right, all the way from renewal or authoring and generation, collaboration, just not just the contract itself, which might, kind of bolt into the process maybe at the end a little bit up front, but how do we actually use the contract to get better commercial value out of all of your processes? And I kind of call this my, atomic chart. So there are lots of end-to-end processes: source to pay, order to cash, finance has its processes, there's contingent workforce, and HR, hire to retire, IT, vendor management, service management, GRC, supply chain risk, third-party risk, your customer, both on the customer side, know your supplier, know your customer. All of these things have contract information, are key to the contracts. Scorecarding, if you're going to do, relationship management, supplier management, customer management, hey, we're going to measure each other on scorecards. Great. Is it in the contract? That would be good to have it in there to actually be on really the ultimate same page on what you're doing. So the whole thing around where things are going within contracts is actually going to push out to commerce and business and be able to support your commercial activities and be able to drive more value, so that you don't just kind of, and it's kind of an evolution to this, right? Get your repository in place, get some visibility into your contracts, start creating new ones much more quickly and better, free yourselves up from the low value tasks. And in doing that, now we can start to concurrently author agreements when we're doing our source to pay process up front versus, hey, vendor, surprise, here's another 15 terms and conditions that maybe weren't negotiated up front that, maybe are going to create a few weeks of delay. And same thing on the customer side, right? So how do we get better commercial outcomes and then ultimately in better relationships? And then as we do that, now we can start to kind of go in deeper into the supply chain. We can start to push, supplier code of conduct, agreements through multiple tiers in the supply chain. We can start getting deeper into assets, and start to unlock new things around blockchain and all that kind of stuff, which we'll talk about the tech side in itself. And tech and digital is really key to unlocking all of this, but most foundationally, this is kind of the trend that's happening. And this is what you have said to the market. I'm not sure where Tim is. Tim's going to be speaking later. Tim Cummins, who runs CCLM, which is the absolute best organization if you really want to get into contract and commercial management. They really drive a lot of best practice and insights and training and accreditation and all that stuff. But one of the things that they publish every year, which is great, which is kind of the most negotiated terms, and they kind of give the top 10 most negotiated terms and also the most important terms. So on the left, you see kind of your typical stuff, right, around risk management, limitation of liability, indemnification, termination, warranty. Obviously, there can be, there's big dollars associated with that. You need to kind of manage that. But look at all the stuff that's most important from just, the day-to-day, what we're doing all the time. It's all of the commercial stuff. Have we agreed to the right scope and goals? Does everybody know what they're doing, the responsibilities? Do we really know how we're calculating the pricing, how that's actually changing? What are the SLAs about? How do we deal with the penalties and rebates and all that happy stuff, right? So this is what's really most important. But what's funny is that when you actually do look at contracts, a lot of time it's like, all right, a lot of this stuff is like boilerplate, kind of this. And I have like a little simple maturity model. I have a more advanced one, but I kind of just simplified it down to kind of three levels. So we got to go from this world of, okay, we have kind of, text-based contracts, and maybe we got some templates, and maybe we copy, paste, edit, which is just not a great way to be, dealing with things, and having, legal kind of drive all those terms. Meanwhile, the business is out here doing stuff around the commercial stuff, and then we kind of like try to bolt those together, and hopefully it makes sense. And meanwhile, legal doesn't trust procurement doesn't trust legal necessarily. Nobody trusts sales. I don't know. I'm just, kind of getting. I'm just kidding. So there, there's a lot of issues in that old operating model. As we go to intermediate, right now we start to get into good basic CLM applications. We can understand our contracts. We actually have clause libraries, standard clauses, fallback clauses, some metadata around these things, and we can actually get our house in order around how we manage the contracts and proactively start to work that with the business so that we don't get into, oh, by the way, we already picked a vendor, can you get a better deal? That doesn't help things, right? You need to get ahead of the curve. So this is where you have cross-functionally folks using strong CLM platforms tied in with some of the major processes that are driving, commercial impact in your organization. And then you got a little more advanced stuff. And this is where you really start getting into AI, but it's more than just kind of the machine learning stuff. It's really about how do we just model this knowledge about these risks and our obligations, and how do we tie that into supply risk management? How do we tie it into GRC? So, when we make promises to regulators on behalf of customers or ourselves, those are commitments, right? And how do we make sure that we honor those? So how do we get that kind of modeling much more deeper, and how do we start driving that, remember that graphic before, out into our broader business process? And by doing that, we can start to free up our time to really do win-win stuff with our suppliers and with our customers, co-innovation, all those things. And by the way, you need good IP protection agreements that are really tuned to the nature of how you're innovating with those folks. So as you start to kind of then push that out, and more decisions, you can kind of say, all right, end users, if you're picking from our standard, terms and conditions and clauses, it's going to flow right through, no problem. If you're going to go and try to create your own agreements, then we're going to have a little bit of a different discussion. So let's kind of finally get to the digital piece of this. So foundational, having good contract lifecycle management functionality is absolutely, critical. And so as we talk about tying this into your other business systems, you want to make sure that you have some good handoffs and linkages, and more than just like a contract ID, and that's fine in those other systems that kind of, link into the CLM system, which then might use Office 365 as the user interface, because, legal loves Microsoft Word, and you got to be able to deal with that environment, whether it's a download or whether it's a, concurrent environment. But, think where things are going with Google Docs and whatever. There's a lot of technology in here. But anyway, so make sure that you kind of get the basics in place around your contract repositories, your clause libraries, your standard processes, and slowly improve that operating model. So now as you start to get into pushing this out into the areas that are of most importance to you, in IT service management, let's say, just internal help desk or service, customer service side. Maybe it's big money over on the buy side. Maybe it's in finance. Maybe it's in risk management, or if you're highly regulated, tying into that and actually having GRC put the R in GRC, not just checkbox compliance things we have to do, for the auditors and the NGOs. That's where you really start bringing in the contracts as commercial system of record really more deeply into the value of those broader processes. And as you do that, you got to go deep, right? And so some of this you're going to get out of the box with Agiloft, and in terms of some of the metadata and things around the contracts. But so for example, like assets, right? So Agiloft has an asset management kind of data model, because it's dealing with equipment and services, and it's great. So that one's you have terrific. If you have something else, so let's say around commodities or other types of things where you want to kind of model the supply chain. You want to do multi-tier contractor, subcontractor, sub-sub. I want to flow the contracts down. I want to take my customer contracts, translate that back over to the buy side. And, I'm sure a lot of you have some pretty interesting use cases, and I know that you do, around how you're using the solution. But that ability to really flexibly expand the data model, and then eventually maybe gets kind of really rolled maybe into core product. But that ability to have that, for you to do that, and to have upgradability, and not just to have the cement shoes tied on, or turn everything into a mega IT project, is huge, right? It's all about agility. So if you can really use the power of the platform and be able to do that, that's key. Now, that open platform idea, there's a lot of pieces to it, right? There's workflow, there's forms, there's navigation, there's personalization. Who are you? What are you trying to do? What are you allowed to see? Who can you share that with? That type of thing. I mean, I was just talking to a client, and they are, they have like 28 different folks in their organization that touch on different pieces of the contract. So there's a lot of orchestration, and there's a lot of really big data privacy, data security issues, that are part of that. But analytics is huge. Number one area that on the CPO study was analytics. And guess why? We're trying to get more insights out of the systems that we have, from performance management, from a risk management, and just about, how do we just manage these processes better? So analytics is huge. Integration, and this notion of integration, platform as a service. So how do we not just hand code little adapters, but maybe Agiloft and partners can really kind of create a point and click little integrations. Great, we got Salesforce integration, no problem. Here's how you do it. Here's how you do your mappings. Terrific. Make that as easy to use. TurboTaxize that as much as the rest of the application. the user interface, whether it's in, Office 365, whether it's in standard Word, whether it's in Google, really kind of bringing you into context and meeting the users where they do most of their work in Salesforce or in Ariba or wherever, whatever system that you're using in those areas. That ability to kind of handshake and really make the users kind of be able to go across those different systems is really a key piece around integration, user experience, and UX is like a huge thing right now, especially for big companies. How do we get adoption of the system? And like Colin was mentioning, one of the reasons why the systems fail is that people are just overwhelmed. They need help with how to adopt all this stuff, and that means built-in training, and maybe there's some chatbots in there, as well. But this is kind of where this notion of platforms to allow you to do really cool things with the solution really plays well. And if you do that, you can do something like guided contracting. And guided contracting is a pretty simple idea. I coined this term of guided buying back in 2004. And the reason why I did that is that there was a lot of sell-side vendors that were basically saying, hey, we're going to drive the customer through this configuration process, and basically the buyer is just kind of pathed, through the process. Well, on the buy side, people don't like to be sold through or pathed. They like to kind of control their own destiny on how they want to buy. So the notion of guided buying is how do we actually do the sourcing, the process from specification, sourcing, contracting, and how do we drive that process in a way that is very repeatable, very scalable, in the same kind of way that you do configuration, configurators on the sell side. So you could probably do some guided contracting, and you may right now, right? We'll just do some questions, some surveys, and we'll get people to the right template. Okay, good start, maybe. But let's actually start using those surveys and those questions to actually dynamically start building up clauses to actually maybe create a template, but certainly go right to the end agreement, right to the MSA or the SOW. How do we build that up? And then ultimately, how do we provide that guidance at a deeper level around the actual provisional language and the obligations, not just the blocks of text, called clauses, right? How do we kind of build that up? So that is the piece where as you start to kind of go across all these areas where the artificial intelligence and machine learning kind of takes place. And this is really where this is really hot right now is in CLM, and particularly around getting your old legacy contracts kind of converted and brought into this much more granular clause, rich clause repository. That takes some work, it takes some training, and this is where if all of you are all using the systems and behind the scenes, it's getting smarter and smarter. So this is kind of like Google Translate for legalese, right? We take a counterparty contract, bring it in, right? This is what it is. We know who the supplier is. We can shred it. We know where all the clauses are. We know some of the basic things around. We're looking for the renewal dates and all the basic kind of metadata. And then we say, great, all right, let's kind of go into the contracts. And now we have contract-specific kind of analytics that say, all right, termination. Is this termination for cause, not for cause? What are the triggers on that? Really build kind of clause-specific domain knowledge and training the system to know how to analyze these things so that it can really surface some of these issues. I saw a presentation, it was interesting actually last week, and it was an oil and gas client, and they were like, one of the things that they found as they went through this was they had a force majeure clause, and it was like, earthquakes, acts of God, whatever, and then it was like supplier failure was kind of tucked in there. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, that is not an act of God, that is something that, the supplier screwed up. So you have to be able to know how to look through these things and model this information much better and build the machine learning algorithms and the rules and the knowledge bases and all that stuff around it. And if you do that well, then you can start to not only analyze your portfolio and say, where is that risk hiding, right? And not just looking for the word, Brexit or whatever, getting into much deeper kind of analysis, so that you could start doing some risk scoring. And by the way, when you start doing risk scoring and you can actually, contract risk scoring, you can actually start to now evaluate contracts at the same time that you get, let's say, supplier bids, and look at the risk scores as well as the other evaluative elements all at one time, so that you're looking at both risk and reward at the same time. Those things should be brought in, real time into that commercial decisioning, right? And then ultimately, as we've talked about in guided contracting, maybe you get into that natural language, generation and guidance on how to, there's a little more in the future. And oh, by the way, there's the stuff around smart contracts and blockchain. This is definitely going to be transformative eventually. But this isn't something that you necessarily have to build yourself unless you are trying to do something really innovative out on Ethereum or these other blockchains, and you're trying to do something, in your industry that really relies on that, it's just something that's going to become infrastructure that is going to be part of solutions over time. So it's certainly important, and it obviously when you have, if you have lots of devices out there that you're monitoring and you want to fail-safe triggers on the compliance side to have autonomous contracting, this is key infrastructure to do that. But for most companies, they want to keep humans in the loop. And the bottom line is if you do all this well, if the solution providers can actually start to do this well, it's going to pay off. By the way, this is our kind of magic quadrant on steroids. We have like 200 elements in this area that we evaluate the vendors on, and that's our y-axis. That's our solution score. And the x-axis is completely CUSAT, right? This whole thing is a transparent model that we use. You can go to our website and pick different area sourcing, whatever. Pick a persona, whether you want cheap and cheerful or deep, and we'll generate these maps. You can just get them, just for free. And then if you want to get maybe deeper insight, that's where we make some of our additional money from on the practitioner side. So guess what? Guess who is the customer leader? Agiloft. So first of all, thank you for all the folks who have actually, went in and did your CUSAT reviews. It's not too bad. It's like 18 questions or something like that. But we go and we vet these things and make sure they're kosher. But it pays off. I mean, I think the money-back guarantee is a pretty cool thing as well, but and very much differentiated. But I think this is really, and from reading the comments, and it's really about the power of the platform. And so anyway, I just wanted to say, good job. You guys are kicking butt out there, really making this platform do all sorts of really cool things. And if you do it well, there's a ton of value. There's a lot of different kind of benchmarks out there. A lot of these can kind of get a little more complex, a little more squishy. It's a big area to kind of focus on. How do you put the value around risk reduction? How do you put dollars on that? There's some techniques that you can, some kind of clever guerrilla tactics. And actually, there's going to be a session on that, I think this afternoon, on the ROI piece that we'll be facilitating. So if you want to kind of dive into that, we'll kind of get into that. I'm running out of time here, so I'm just going to wrap up. So to go back to the graduate, if contracts and commerce can kind of come together, and if you're using platforms to kind of make that happen, you're going to drive more value, you're going to drive less risk, and that's ultimately going to be good for you personally, you and your function, you as global, the global process owners in your organization, and it's also going to make your customers happy. It's going to make your suppliers happy, and goodness for all. So anyway, there's some additional my contact information, some additional reading links. You guys can go check out more of the stuff that we write about. I'll be around for the rest of the conference, and if you want to come and hunt me down, happy to share this. Again, you're going to get a copy of the presentation, but if you need it earlier, you just want to chat, feel free to let me know. And from there, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up before I get the hook and pass on. So thank you very much all for attending. Enjoy the rest of the Agiloft Summit. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Pierre Mitchell. Pierre, thank you.